in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's the Never-Ending Battle, the weekly Superman ranking podcast that takes a look at the adventures of the Man of Steel and his extended family in their never-ending battle for truth and justice, and rank those adventures from best to worst. I'm your host, Jordan, and welcome to the third episode of the show. I have a great one for you today, as the Never-Ending Battle takes a look at 3 early Superman Elseworld tales. Now, with us looking at 3 early Superman Elseworld tales this week, it is probably best interest to talk about what is actually an Elseworld. So, DC, for every Elseworld book, for the most part, includes this blurb. So, this is the following blurb you'll see on every Elseworld title, especially the early ones. In Elseworlds, heroes are taken from their usual settings and put into strange time and places, some that have existed or might have existed, and others that can't, couldn't, or shouldn't exist. The result, stories that make characters who are as familiar as yesterday's seem as fresh as tomorrow. So, for most people, Elseworlds are synonymous with Marvel's What Ifs, but there's some fundamental differences. Elseworlds largely function as a spin-off of this concept from Silver Age DC Comics, especially Silver Age Superman comics, called the Imaginary Tale. It's important to just understand the difference between an imaginary story or imaginary tale versus something that you would say is a hoax or a dream. Imaginary stories happened within their own continuity. A dream and a hoax never happened. And they largely function as a way to allow for storytelling that was not really permitted during the code-heavy era of the Silver Age. You could not show the heroes losing. You could not show evil triumphing. You couldn't show death of major characters. And if you wanted to do that, you had to kind of get around the rules. And the way they got around the rules at DC, especially in the Superman titles, was they had on the Superman book, they would say, hey, this is an imaginary tale, readers. This did not happen, but here's what would happen if this scenario was true. DC likes doing these books, having the ability to tell stories that are not bound by continuity, but are interesting. Not just with DC, that's synonymous with a lot of comic industry. As I mentioned, Marvel's famous for having their own similar books called the What If series. But there's a very major distinction between the two. What Ifs, they have a different kind of production quality. Marvel put out What If as a regular ongoing book for multiple volumes. Those are bound in the traditional comic binding, but done with the regular periodical style with the staples and a paper binding. It's fine. They were made like a typical comic book. Often they would have maybe some marquee writers if they had somebody out there. But you'd likely get a up-and-coming artist or a steady hand with a okay writer. On the contrary to What Ifs, Elseworlds come along a little bit later in terms of production. What Ifs are pretty much during the Silver Age all the way into the Bronze. With Elseworlds, the production doesn't start until post-Crisis. Now, what makes this book different from, say, the Marvel What Ifs? They were often be printed as prestige one-shot. Elseworld books were printed almost always in square-bound. What that meant is those are the books that have an actual hard spine that would go on the bookshelf. They look like a novel, the graphic novel. On top of that, you would have often a more high-level art team, more creative. You would have a higher-level writer, and usually people you could not maybe get for an ongoing. You would have a one-shot, maybe. Some of the Elseworlds would be in multi-issues, like Justice League The Nail or Superman Red Sun. They would have multi-issues, but large chunks of Elseworld are going to be found in this done-in-one thing that you could easily get. And they had an advantage. They were really nice. They were really well taken care of. A little bit more weight and gravitas. It felt like a bigger deal. DC made it a bigger deal, so it was a bigger deal. Elseworld is a concept that is not perfect. There's some fundamental flaws when it comes to Elseworlds. Mainly it comes from the fact that this is what they talk about over there in the Bat Chat with Man and Wheel podcast, the Elseworld problem. Elseworlds have this nature, but they feel like they have to include everybody. You get these Elseworld books that would have every major villain, every major supporting cast member, everything. They would try to condense 20, 30 years of continuity into one issue, maybe 2, and try to fit them in this weird scenarios. That said, that may be a problem, but it's a small problem, and it's not unusual for any kind of creative team when you get a one shot at a character. You're probably going to try to crab it in. So, this is a good time as any to begin the first story of the night. Round 1. Superman, Speeding Bullets, number 1. Written by J.M. DeMatteis, art by Eduardo Barreto, with colors by Lee Dorchild. The plot revolves around a Elseworld essentially where what if Superman was raised as Batman? In the outskirts of Gotham, a rocket crashes in front of Thomas and Martha Wayne. While investigating the wreckage, the couple finds a young child that they take in to raise as their own and give him the name of Bruce Wayne. Growing up, Bruce lives a sheltered life in Wayne Manor. He doesn't get out much, and of course, this all changes one night when his family takes the night out to go see the movie Zorro. And at this point, if you're familiar with the Batman origin story, you know where this goes. As they go down Crime Alley, Joe Chill confronts the Wayne and ends up killing him in the process. However, in this scenario, since Bruce has his amazing gifts, he uses those amazing gifts to maim and eventually kill Joe Chill. Traumatized by the events, Bruce finds himself even more withdrawn from the world until someone tries to kill him at Wayne Manor in his adulthood. This event will serve as the catalyst for Bruce Wayne as he jumps to action and tries to save Gotham City in two fronts. First, as becoming the publisher of the Gotham Gazette, and second, becoming the mass vigilante, the Batman. Alright, let's talk talent. So J.M. DeMatteis has a long comic career running throughout multiple DC and Marvel titles. He's most famous for, in DC, most people with his run on Justice League, aka the Justice League International book, aka Justice League America. This is also known as the Blah-ha-ha-ha era. This is that post-crisis Justice League series. He's also been responsible for writing all sorts of Batman books over the years in different titles, being Detective, Batman, or any other ancillary titles. Eduardo Barreto was a talented artist whose career spanned throughout most of the 80s and all the way through the 2000s until his passing in 2011. He's known for his various work on Batman books, alongside the New Teen Titans Volume 2 that launched right around the time of the Crisis. He's also responsible for doing the art on various DC Elseworlds titles, including Another Story of the Night, but also responsible for stuff like the Lex Luthor autobiography. He's a very talented artist. He was so how he's able to render caricatures. He has really good cartooning skills, and that actually translated to his syndicated newspaper strip when he worked as a syndicated newspaper strip artist with stints on both Judge Parker and the Phantom, which is pretty massive for a comic book artist. You usually don't see very many comic book artists jump over to newspaper strips these days. As for the comic itself, so Speeding Bullets is, from what I could tell, one of the earliest, from what I could tell, is the first Superman Elseworlds story, and it makes sense that they pretty much do a Batman story, because at this point, most of the Elseworld books were just Batman stories. We had Batman about Gotham by Gaslight, we had Batman Holy Terror, and of course, they were like, hey, let's keep this Batman gravy train going, let's keep doing it. So what if Superman was raised as Batman? And there's some major differences. What I think worked really well with this is because it is essentially, while a Superman story, it's essentially a Batman story. The origin is fairly concise, and it does play well with the year one origins of Batman that we're familiar with. So it does play on those similar tropes, so you do have a little bit of familiarity with it. It doesn't spend too much time on those moments, other than just kind of establishing that despite being Kal-El of Krypton, he's still raised as Bruce Wayne. So effectively, he is Bruce Wayne. The difference is, there's some other stuff we'll talk about in a second, mainly what he does after he gets his powers. The other things that I think also do work well, though, is this is not the same kind of Bruce Wayne that would go, because it is Kal-El, he does not go into, once his parents die, he doesn't go into this like sense of justice and goes on this personal journey to become the Batman. And this one, he kind of goes a different path, and he kind of stays true to what is Clark Kent's sensibilities. So he ends up becoming the publisher of the Gotham Gazette. While he's naming out a news reporter, he's still involved with the newspaper. He understands the significance of a free press. And he also ends up fighting injustice via vigilantism. And that is really interesting, because that vigilantism, it's kind of in large elements of this is actually not that far off from Golden Age Superman, but there's some differences that we'll get into here in just a moment. Overall, I think it was a fairly simple idea. There's a very basic idea of what if Superman was raised as Batman, but they explore it pretty sensibly to a degree. The costume design, I think, is really neat. It's just simply just a Batman design, but with a Superman, instead of the oval bat, yellow bat, it is a Superman shield with a bat symbol in it, which I think is a very effective visual distinction. One interesting note is he wears a fully covered face mask, which is not typical of Batman nor Superman. So there's something there about that. Overall, though, the costume design is pretty neat. As for the rest of the story, it's because it does follow the Batman story fairly well to about halfway. It moves pretty quick. It moves pretty fast. But the problem comes about when the book transitions to introduction of the villain with Lex Luthor. That's where the swift pacing of the story starts becoming a liability. So the way the book essentially is structured is that after the initial origin moment, where, pretty much the Batman origin mixed with the Superman origin, we get the bit where Bruce Wayne uses his heat vision to melt the face off of Joe Chill and end up killing Joe Chill inadvertently. We end up getting a totally different kind of pathway there. That's where the story starts branching. We get the idea that Batman becomes Batman because he gets attacked, and he starts taking charge of the paper and taking charge of his own company. And what makes it interesting to me, and this is where the divergence starts happening here, though, as well, is when they introduce Luthor at this point. Luthor's trying to buy Wayne Industries. We're thinking we're seeing a Luthor that is not much different from the Luthor of Man of Steel, the John Byrne Luthor. The problems start falling in there. So early throughout the story, we're teased that Luthor survived a chemical plant explosion. What that actually translates to is they reveal that Luthor is also the Joker. Because up to this point, we're seeing this section of, once they get to adulthood, Bruce, they're seeing bits where Bruce is being, once he decides he's going to be a vigilante, he's fighting crime as the Batman somewhat violently, but also he is in the newspaper room getting people from the former Daily Planet. He's hiring Lois Lane. He's bringing in Perry White. He's got Jimmy Olsen. He's getting all the people from the Daily Planet that we know. And we're starting to fall a little close into that Elseworlds trap of trying to cram everything into one issue. But then they decide, when we introduce the Joker, we're not getting a lot of build up there. There's not a lot of interactions between the Joker and Superman at this point. Sorry, Batman. We're seeing that the Batman we're getting in this universe, the Speeding Bullets Batman, is a lot more violent. We're seeing that. And then we see the Joker. And the pacing then kind of goes sideways as they try to deal with the Joker, but we're not seeing a lot of spread out in confrontations between them. It just quickly becomes, I'm the Joker now. And he does some silly getaway, and then he has to stop him. It's laboring, and it's not very well paced because the reveal is, while it is teased, it just doesn't have a lot of room to breathe. And that brings us to really doesn't really work in Speeding Bullets for me, at least. Speeding Bullets, first off, I really don't care for how Bruce is particularly vicious here. So we get this sample of a Superman that is raised as Batman. We get a weird experiment where, instead of being Batman with, hey, he has Batman fighting powers, but he's also got Superman strength, or he's got Superman powers with detective skills, we just get really almost a Punisher level style vigilante. He's wearing a full mask. He's dropping people off rooftops. It's implied that he's got a body count. And if he ain't killing people, he's really crippling them. And that just doesn't sit well with me, because that doesn't sit as, one, they show that Clark is Bruce. I keep mixing them up because there's the way the story is structured. We keep seeing stuff like, we saw Bruce gets raised right from Thomas. Thomas Wayne instills into him the same kind of things that we saw with Jonathan Kent, Pa Kent. We see he still has an Alfred. We see all these things here. So he still has voice of reason. But instead of getting that, of some kind of a decent hybrid, we're getting kind of this third. I don't know why they went with the particularly violent route other than to be distinctly visual for them. And I don't know if that's a particularly effective one at that. Personally, I think it just doesn't work at being vicious. It just doesn't ring true to me at this point. I think it doesn't serve either character, because the whole idea of Elseworlds is, what if we take a bunch of stuff away from the character and put them in a new time and new place? Are they still the same hero? And in reality, they're not. He's not really here. Yeah, we get the window dressing that he's Bruce Wayne with the stuff that is also Superman, kind of a weird amalgamation, but we're not getting that truthfully. We're not getting a personality that's that. We're getting a totally different personality. So much so that when Lois meets with him, she confronts him more like she's confronting a vigilante like Punisher. She goes, you are particularly violent. She tells him, you wear a mask all the time. You can't be doing that. And that creates this weird pacing issues as well, because then we have to get to the ending, and we'll get to that in a second. But Bruce being particularly vicious here is not very interesting. The Luthor being a Joker is also a real problem, because it's just too much. I'd rather have been just the Joker or just Luthor. Being a Jokerized Luthor could be something of interest. I mean, we're seeing that with, we saw that with DC Comics lately. They've been doing some stuff with the Jokerized Luthor. I think the current Mark Waid stuff's doing that in World's Finest. But we're not seeing that and played out in any meaningful way here in Speeding Bullets. We're not really getting to, what's the difference between Luthor and Joker being different? Is he any different? No, he's just Joker who happens to be physically looking like Luthor. And he's a little bit more Silver Agey than his escape plans. He's got a helicopter belt. It's really weird. And it fits tonally just out of place. Honestly, there's just too much stuff going on in the issue and not enough time to do any of it well. The intent of being a one-shot is effective. I do like that being a one-and-done story, but two-parter would have probably been better here, better served out. At least we could have teased out the Luthor-Joker reveal just a little bit more, allow more time to flesh out why the ending being a real problem, which is at the end, after Lois talks to him and they defeat the Joker, don't kill the Joker. That's kind of the big thing. Batman decides he's going to retire as Batman, ditch the costume, and then instead become Superman. And he gets a cool looking suit. It's a really nice looking 90s Superman suit, but it does not fit the character. It seems out of place. And it seems literally out of anywhere. It's an abrupt ending. And I would love to see more time fleshing that out. And we don't really get that here. It's a one shot. I mean, it's a prestige 48 page format, I believe, on the actual page count. It looks good. It's done well. Barretto does a fantastic job of being evocative with this stuff, but it's just visually, or at least story wise, paced like crap, especially after the Joker introduction. It just gets too much trying to get done at one time. They realize they're running out of pages and trying to cram it all in, and it just doesn't work. That brings us to the standout moment of the story. So every issue, even good or bad, has a standout. And for me, the most memorable part of the issue, and it's obviously the one they thought was most memorable too, or at least evocative, was that there's a scene where Bruce just realizes he has his powers. He realizes the trauma he's overcome, that he's basically suppressed. And he starts flying around in the Batcave in the bottom of the Wayne Manor. And he flies around the Batcave in the dark. And it's a really interesting picture. It shows Barretto doing this really nice weightlessness to Superman, Batman, or whatever you want to call him, to Kal-El. And we're seeing the part where he's just flying around with the bats. And it's just simple imagery, very weightlessness. It's very quiet moment in a lot of ways. It's got some talking, but it feels very quiet. And it's a standout moment. So much so that DC felt like it was a big one because they put it on the back of the trade dress cover. So it's actually obviously a big deal for them. So I thought it was really interesting, really interesting visual. And I do like the new Superman suit they end up designing at the end. I wish we'd actually seen that some more. To me, as somebody who didn't read it till recently, Speeding Bullets was underwhelming at times. It's not the best. It's not the worst story of the night by any means, but nor is it the best. It's got some serious flaws, and that's probably the case. You could make the case for a lot of Elseworlds stories. They're really interesting ideas that maybe don't give enough time to be fleshed out, and they're just something missing or too much trying to go on at once, and they just suffer from pacing or trying to be overcrowded. And with that, it's time to put Speeding Bullets on the list. So over here at the Never Ending Battle, we rank every Superman story from best to worst. Now over on our list, we have our first story and our overall best Superman story of all time, Superman Birthright by Mark Waid and Lionel Francis Yu. It is the definitive origin for me of Superman, and it's the best looking Superman origin. It's the best one, interesting one. I find it to be the best. On number 2, we have The Man of Steel from John Byrne. It's a pretty good Superman origin. It's dated in places, but it's fine. For number 3, we have the Rutland, Vermont Halloween crossover. The secret crossover between Justice League and 2 Marvel books, Amazing Adventures and Thor number 207. And they go to Rutland, Vermont to deal with Felix Faust. And at the same time, over at Marvel, the other characters are dealing with other things going on in Rutland, and there's a nice B storyline that intercedes between all 3 books. It's a fun little story, so it's the 3rd best Superman story of all time. Over at number 4, we have Superman and House of Mystery, which is DC Comics Presents number 53, so it's a nice fun little haunted house story with Mr. Mixoplex. Over at number 6, we have Sweet Dreams, which is Superman Batman number 65. It's not very good. It's the issue where the Scarecrow basically drugs Batman, Superman, Joker, and Batman, and Lex Luthor, and they all have really short nightmares. It's not very interesting. And the worst Superman story of all time is at number 6, Secret Origin by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. It's very rote and boring. All right, so where do we put Speeding Bullets on this list? So for me, Speeding Bullets is not perfect. It's got some flaws, but it's got historical significance. To me, it's definitely better than Secret Origin. It's definitely better than Sweet Dreams. I'll read this again over that. The question is, do I want to read it above, say, DC Comics Presents number 53 or the Rutland, Vermont stuff? I don't think it's good as Man of Steel, nor do I think it's good as Superman Birthright by any means. Personally, I think I would read this above House of Mystery. Well, House of Mystery is fine. It's a pre-crisis Superman story, like pre-crisis, and it's an interesting, fun little story, but it's not very memorable in places. It's fun. I had a lot of fun with it. It's one issue, but in terms of significance to the character, significance to the DC publishing line, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme. Speeding Bullets does have that advantage there. And I also think the art by Eduardo Barretto is more interesting here. I love Curt Swan in DC Comics Presents number 53, but I do think Barretto does a better job with the character here and does a lot more moody things with it. And some of the designs are really cool, even if I think some of them are lacking, like the Joker Luthor design. But I don't think I would read this above the Rutland, Vermont crossover, mainly because I really like Justice League number 103. It's just them dealing Felix Faust, and it's simple. It's really just a small fight issue with Lee Wein writing it, but it's a fun fight issue. You got some cool bits, and I like Silver Age. So I think this is the new number 4 on the list. Which brings us to our second story of the night. Round 2, Superman Kal, number 1. Written by Dave Gibbons, art by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, with colors by DividedCompanion. No letter credited as well here. Following the destruction of Krypton, young baby Kal lands in medieval England countryside. Kal is, of course, blessed with tremendous gifts and uses them to save James Olsen from certain doom on playing in the field one day. This draws the attention of James' father, the local blacksmith, who offers Kal an apprenticeship. Under his apprenticeship, Kal grows stronger in his powers and even enters a knight's tourney for the ruthless Baron Luthor, in order to also gain attention of the maid Lois. Okay, before we get into the story, let's talk about talent real quick. So this one is got some really marquee talent across the board. Mega talented artist going on here is Dave Gibbons. Now, he may not be doing art duties. He's known as but Dave Gibbons is the artist behind The Watchmen, as well as The Man Who Has Everything, the classic Superman Alan Moore story. That is probably one of the most well-adapted Alan Moore stories ever. But Dave Gibbons is a major artist. Now, this is not Dave's first written work. We'll actually be covering one of those in a future episode. But this is one early on in Dave Gibbons' writing career. Now, Dave Gibbons, alongside being an artist, Dave Gibbons is a somewhat renowned writer. He does write a large stretch of the Green Lantern Corps books in the mid-2000s alongside Jeff Johns' Green Lantern title. And I don't, as a whole, I actually don't mind Dave Gibbons' writing. I think he has a pretty good eye for character voices. He does do pretty good sense of action and good pacing, and he's one of the most successful, I should say, not few, but one of the most successful artist turned writers that we see in the industry. I do think his art skills are obviously much more significant. I really cannot understate the importance of Watchmen. Fantastic writer for the most part. I have some issues with some of his work, and this one is no different. We're going to talk about that. I have some issues with what happens here in Kal. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, JLGL. This man is the definitive house style of the DC Comics through the 80s and 90s. It's obviously literally the basis for the DC style guide for marketing at the time. You can buy, they recently just relisted that on the internet. You could actually go buy that again. He has this really clean textbook style superhero design. It's not too busy, but not too simple. It's kind of a nice middle ground between some of the competing house styles of the DC at the time. Now, obviously, comic book wise, John Byrne's take on Superman would actually, would take hold for the most part. Garcia Lopez's just brings a nice, clean amount of work to the book, and that's what we see here in Kal. Now, Garcia Lopez is going to do he does a lot of other comic runs, but here in Kal, he is primarily not even doing real superhero work. He gets to do more fantasy work. So it's actually interesting what he's doing here. And I think he does a really good job. Honestly, all my issues with Kal's we're going to see here in a minute. I do have a lot of issues with Kal as a comic and as a story structure and some of the decisions made. It's not on Garcia Lopez. Garcia Lopez kills it. He understood the assignment. He went with it, and he delivers. There's a lot of art scenes in this book that are carried heavily by Kal's amazing talent. And I think it's just one of the fantastic pieces of work in this book. And it's one of the reasons the book works well as it does for me. If it was any other artist, I don't know if I would have enjoyed the book as much as I did. Garcia Lopez carries the book. So that brings us to the comic itself. My thoughts on Kal. Oh boy. So when it came time to do the Elseworlds episode, because I decided early on, I have a list in my notebook. I got a Superman notebook, literally for the show, for the Never Ending Battle. I was like, hey, what episodes do I want to do? Themed episodes. And I got a list of about 52 or so episodes, plus some more ideas. And one of the early ones I wrote down were Elseworlds, because Superman has a lot of Elseworld stories. Not as many as Batman, obviously, but Superman has some really famous ones. And I did want to use the most famous two Superman Elseworld stories with Kingdom Come and Red Sun, and even to an extent, Secret Identity, which is technically not an Elseworlds, but for all intent and purpose it is. I did not want to go out and do those Elseworlds first. So when I decided to do Elseworlds, I was looking through the Elseworld trade over there on DC Comics Infinite. And I saw this Superman Kal, and I'm like, ooh, a fantasy Superman story. And honestly, the original intent for this episode was going to be looking at the fantasy Elseworlds, because there's actually a few versions of Superman doing a fantasy story, and they aren't bad. But ultimately decided to put off Dark Knights of Steel. That was what I was looking at. And don't get me wrong, Dark Knights of Steel is fine. It's just got a lot going on. And I was like, I don't really want to read 12 issues for this. I kind of wanted a lighter episode. So I was like, okay, let's scratch it. We're going to go do Kal, and we're going to do some of these early Elseworld stories. And if you notice, a lot of the Elseworld stories are playing on the Superman origin. In this issue, we see what if Superman was in medieval England. Okay, that's fine. Honestly, kind of reads more like medieval Norman France, but that's neither here or there. We're not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into my European history background stuff, my general, personal interest in that kind of thing. Kal has a lot of good things going for it. So when I read Kal first time, I was like, as I was reading the book, I mean, I'm really vibing with this. It's a very fantastic. I already told you, Garcia Lopez's art is killer. It's fantastic. It's honestly one of the best looking books of that era. Even if the digital coloring, it is amazing looking. And that's impressive because digital coloring looks like crap at this point in the 90s. It is not a good place to be. And Digital Chameleon, the team over there doing this one, actually really balled on this one. You got this really nice looking cover where it looks like a leather bound book, and the title is just evocative. It's Kal, which is simple, and it's a very pulpy nature fantasy book, and I love me some good old fashioned pulp. Problem is, good old fashioned pulp has a lot of problematic elements, and we see it come out here, and that's what frustrates me with Kal. Oh boy, we're getting to that. But I really did enjoy the pulpy nature of the book. It is ultimately very enjoyable, very fun. There's bits where Kal is literally, working metal. He's just, shirtless, and Garcia Lopez draws the crap out of a shirtless Kal-El, and he's over here working metal. He gets, Louise's favor. And by the way, I'm saying Louise, it's Lois, but they give her a French spelling. Hence why I'm saying it's Norman France. Well, you get his, he gets her favor from the tournament, so he's wearing it around his neck, and he's just out there strutting his stuff, just hammering out on this metal, trying to get it out to make this fancy armor for Baron Luthor, and it looks cool. It's a cool looking scene. There's a scene later on the book where they has to fight with kryptonite, so that's the crazy part. So in the book, Baron Luthor wears a pendant of kryptonite that he found in the field, because this is playing around a lot with the John Byrne Man of Steel origin, where that when they found the spaceship contained only one shard of kryptonite. That's where only kryptonite on the planet supposedly was that one piece that came with Kal-El. So Baron Luthor found the kryptonite one day, and he wears it as a pendant. It looks cool. It glows, and it looks like it gives him magical powers. And against Kal, it obviously does. It's kryptonite, poisons Superman. So there's a bit where Superman really cannot do anything against Luthor because he gets really weak in the knees anytime he goes near Luthor. And there's some really cool bits, though, where Kal starts storming Luthor's castle there after, Luthor murders, amongst other things, Louise. And as he's storming Luthor's castle, the men are doing the, siege tactics at the time. They're pouring molten lead onto Superman, which just makes him angrier and doesn't kill him, but also gives him that protective lead coating, which allows him to go near Luthor. So there's really cool bits where he's got this, he literally forces an Excalibur out of the rest of the spaceship, and he flies up, covered in molten lead, and just flying up. Garcia Lopez kills it, and it looks so freaking cool, and it just does the dumbest thing in the middle. So again, I'm reading the book, I'm bobbing with it. I think it's a fantastic comic. I'm like, oh man, this might be one of the best Superman comics for this early part of the list. It's going to go great. I'm loving it. I'm loving this. Then I get to the scene of what Baron Luthor does to Louise. There's obviously a romance between Louise and Kal. They usually don't avoid that in these stories. Louise is obviously attracted to Kal. Kal's attracted to her. And Luthor wants to take Louise. Louise is, in this world, the daughter of the former lord of the community. Olsen calls it the Protector. It reads like he's the landlord, the lord of some sort. I don't know what level of nobility or aristocracy he would have been in this era of medieval times. It doesn't matter. He was a lord. He was a lord protectorate at least, and Louise was his daughter. So when Luthor, I'm assuming, ransacks the village and takes the town, he kills the father and he holds Louise hostage. And I'm assuming the intent is to, when she comes of age, to marry her to consolidate his rule, his ownership of the Lord, in the eyes of whatever king they're serving. I'm assuming the King of England. And I get that's the premise, that's general fantasy and kind of how things are wont to do. But so when Cal calls for his, asks for his hand in marriage and payment of the armor, Luther's not going to do that. So they try to sneak away, and Luther finds out. And when he attacks, Superman can't do anything about it. Cal's only got this cool armor, but Luther's got this really cool armor Cal made, but he's also got kryptonite, so Cal falls like a rock, literally, and he kidnaps Louise. This is where the book takes a dark turn, and this is where my enjoyment of the book immediately nosedives. Because not only does he kidnap Louise, that's whatever, that's story. He then forces himself upon her. He sexually assaults Louise. He kills her, or he kills her then assaults her. He orders Louise's body to be thrown in the moat around the castle. This is where the book takes an awful turn. So this is why obviously I'm not a fan here. And it's really reprehensible. It's that it's overly graphic. It plays it out. Dave Gibbons has a history of kind of putting these kind of dark scenes in his stuff. You could chalk up in The Watchmen, it was maybe an Alan Moore thing, because Alan Moore does play with similar themes. It adds gravitas, way Moore usually does it, kind of darkness to the characters. And not that much different here what Dave is doing. Dave is obviously putting darkness into this world by doing, instead of a high fantasy, he's obviously making a very much a low fantasy. He's going for that, and this wasn't even published at the time, but going for what we now know as a Game of Thrones approach by including a rape scene. Now, not to say that stuff did not happen in those time frames. It obviously did. And it was done in time of war. It's done in times of stuff like that. It's still done to this day in times of war and these situations. This doesn't excuse it, though. And putting it in fiction, a Superman book, it just bothers me. It's an issue with Dave Gibbons that I have in some places, and this one is one of those. And it really kind of undercuts the book. I was talking to somebody online. I like this book a lot. If it wasn't for the fact that Gibbons had a Gibbons and they just chose what they did, I would have probably ranked this book a lot higher. So yeah, it sucks when it happens. Now, there's some standout moments. I will give it this. There's moments I like. Mainly the Luthor fighting the Molten and Molten Net. It's still very much cool. It's very awesome. It's really one of the best scenes in the book. That happens after this, the rape scene. And if you were to take that rape scene out, would just take out that one page, or if it was missing, if all of a sudden it disappeared, it would make the book better. Honest truth, it would make the book better. It would make the book more enjoyable because it is immediately disgusting. All right, with all that, let's talk about ranking this story. Oh boy. Oh, all right. So obviously we here now have 7 stories on the list, and it's definitely like, if I was to take that one page out, it would be a much higher story. I don't think it would be toward the top of the list by any means. There's a lot of, I don't like how they do Louis. I do like how they do the Elseworld stuff. It doesn't fall in the Elseworld trap. It's really fantastic for that. Superman Cal does a good job for not falling into the trap of having a Perry White. It doesn't have a Steve Lombard running around. It doesn't try to do a Batman or a Wonder Woman or any other side characters. It's just Cal, Jimmy Olsen, who serves as the framing device, I should say. Not a very good version of Lois, but Luis, and Luthor that is immediately probably is one of the most vile Luthors you ever will see. I will give it that. But it's also got that rape scene. And I'm not saying that stuff doesn't need to be in fiction. I understand it has a place in fiction. It's just not in a fiction for me. And it really, really hampers my ability to recommend the comic. It would hamper my ability to tell people to check out this comic. I enjoy it up until that point, and I can still enjoy it without knowing that point is there. But I can't even say like with The Watchmen, it's graphic in places, it's awful in places. What happens to these characters? But it's done in an overall narrative that is just fantastic and well constructed, and it has payoffs, and there's importance to everything. There isn't one here. There's no real redemption to that part of the story, and it really just I can't get around it. I read this comic over a month ago before, and I was prepping for the show, and I reread it again, and every time I get to that scene, I just get so frustrated by it. At least with something like The Watchmen, I can recommend it for its art merit and its historical significance. Kal is, while amazing talent on there, I can't recommend it for that. It doesn't have historical significance. Even the Killing Joke, which is not what we're ranking here, that has historical significance. It's not a great. I have issues with it, but it has historical significance. It has a fantastic art, and it looks good. And that's like it does here. This book looks great, but it doesn't have the historical significance. There's not a footnote here to say, hey, while this scene exists, this book has importance to the character's development. Overall, they make something out of it. This is not happening. This is a one and done story. Kal dies at the end of the book. Spoilers. So does Luthor. So does Louise, obviously. It has a nice kind of bow to put it on it. Honestly, it ends really well in terms of how the story ends. I think it does some really cool stuff. But I cannot give it the best. I cannot put it high on the list. And the question is, does it get worse than Sweet Dreams? And I think it is. Sweet Dreams is bad. It's dull. It's kind of boring, but it's got Kelly Jones art, and it's not offensive. Nothing in Sweet Dreams made me go, I hate this comic. I can't recommend this comic in good faith. I can tell people, yeah, it exists. It kind of got some cool moments. It's kind of dumb. Sweet Dreams is kind of dumb. Secret Origin, the bottom of the list. Secret Origin with Jeff Johns, I have issues with because it's boring. It's dull. The art's not very good in places. It's still a comic I can recommend to people. It's safe, and that's actually its biggest flaw. It's safe. It doesn't push anything, but it's safe in that, hey, you're not going to be disgusted by what I recommend. I'm not going to look like a worse person for telling you to check out this story. So with that, Superman Kal goes on the bottom of the list. It is now the worst Superman story of all time here at the Neverending Battle. And I don't know, it probably will be for a while until I read some other worse stuff. And there's some worse stuff out there, obviously. We haven't gone into the racist Superman work, but for now, it's definitely the worst Superman comic of all time. If I could delete a page from it, that would be great, but I can't. That's censorship. It is what it is. And with that brings us to the final story of the night. Round 3. Superman, A Nation Divided. Written by Roger Stern, art by Eduardo Barreto, colors by Chris Chuckery, and letters by Bill Oakley. Hey, we actually got letters credited this time. All right. Brief synopsis here. Let's do this one more time because we're going to these origin stories. Again, we're fleeing the destruction of Krypton, and a young baby Kal lands in the fields of Kansas, except it's the 19th century. As the United States falls into civil war over slavery, Kal joins the side of the Union to stand up for truth, justice, and the American way. With his superpowers, Clark is able to turn the tide of the war, but has revelations that causes him to question his true origins and purpose on the planet. Okay, talking talent real quick. Roger Stern. Okay, Roger Stern. This is the first time we get to talk about Roger Stern here on the podcast. Roger Stern is a fantastic Superman writer. He is the central architect of what we would now known as the Triangle Era. He is the person who takes over Superman following John Byrne. And he takes over Superman for a while. We'll get to do some more Roger Stern comics in the near future. I really enjoy Roger Stern's writing. He does lengthy stints over at Marvel, by the way, on the Avengers and Spider-Man books. And I think he's wildly underrated for his era. In an era that has really high marquee writers that, shepherd books, we have, the folks like Kurt Busiek. You have the Mark Waid, because he's coming up, he's early in the Mark Waid era, but we have the Kurt Busieks. We have, unfortunately, the Chuck Dixons. You have Dave Michelinis, the Chris Claremonts, which are kind of overlapping in this period and who share a lot of similar credits to Roger Stern. They're obviously bigger names in the comic industry. Roger Stern is kind of like this journeyman workman-like writer who gets these really good takes on the character. in every book he's done with longer, pretty lengthy stints, he gets a voice for the character going, and he ends up adding a lot of interesting elements to the book. So, big fan of Roger Stern here on the podcast, and I look forward to talking about more of his comics in later episodes. We've already talked about Eduardo Barreto, so hey, we're again fantastic artist here, especially in this book. This book looks fantastic. It does a period piece really well. This one actually leans into, it is a 19th century Civil War story. So we see a lot of 19th century clothing. We see an interesting take on the Superman costume, which is illustrated by Eduardo Barreto. Designs it to look more like a Union officer's outfit, but with a cape. And instead of the Superman shield with the S, it's a shield with the USA on it because he's fighting in favor of the Union. I really like the design there. It's an interesting one. He's not in it very much, actually, in the comic. He mostly fights in a regular Union soldier outfit, but it does some interesting things. Okay, that brings us, let's go into the thoughts here. I really liked this comic. I thought it was fantastic. The Clark Kent we see here in this comic is on the money. Where most people would play Superman as a pacifist in these situations, and I can understand why, because everybody thinks Superman is all about truth and justice, and they view him as your cool dad that totally understands and just gonna give you a strong talking. People forget that Superman's view of truth and justice is through a righteous indignation toward misjustice. And that's one of the reasons I love the James Gunn take on Superman with David Cornsweet. Cornsweet kills it. The bits in the movie where he stands up, and it's like, I saw some people online teasing the movie trailer for having like, Superman's a petulant man-child. He's over here screaming at Lois about this. No, he's screaming because people were dying, and he wasn't going to listen to some, army brat policy wonk tell him that you couldn't intervene in a geopolitical situation. He didn't care. He was going to stand up because people were dying, and he is going to do something about it. This is what Superman represents. Superman is not a pacifist. Superman would love to be a pacifist. Superman is somebody who takes direct action, and he has righteous indignation. The fantasy of Superman is he's a man with all the power and a will to do something with it, and he does. That's what makes Superman fantastic of a character, and it's one of the best things about him. And Roger Stern gets it, and it's on display here in this comic. So the alternative history that we see here is really interesting as well. Civil War in the United States, for those who are not aware, I come from the the Southern United States, and Civil War history is a major part of our conversation. Tennessee's got a weird relationship on the Civil War. We're one of the last states to leave the Union to join the Confederacy, and one of the first states to leave the Confederacy to join the Union again. But the United States Civil War takes place initially in 1861 and runs all the way to 1865. What they propose here in Cal is, due to Superman's direct intervention into the war ends in 1863. And it gives a really nice, just kind of a different take on Superman. This is a Superman who's not cruel or vindictive that we see here that we saw in Speeding Bullets. This is a Superman that is Superman. It feels like Superman. This is what I feel like Superman would do if he was put in this situation. Now, Roger Stern is one of the best. It's definitely the best writer of the three books of the night here for that reason. It just does a really good job playing on Clark's tendencies. They do some interesting stuff with the origin as well. The art is extremely dynamic. It's fun here, but the origin they're playing around with is the Man of Steel origin, the Byrne origin, and they do some interesting things with it. Actually, first off, and this is probably one of my favorite parts of the book, is Superman learns his true place on the world. Much like how in Man of Steel number 6, Clark goes back to his home after much time away, and then in Man of Steel number 6, he comes and learns his true purpose on the planet, learns his true history. Well, here in the end of A Nation Divided, Clark does come home, and he finds that Ma Kent has passed away, unfortunately, and is defending the country and help reunifying the country, and he feels distraught about it. Pa tells him it's okay. She understood, and it just happened pretty sudden anyway. But he tells her the truth and tells him he's an alien. Clark didn't know this, which is really interesting when there's some stories where Clark doesn't know he's an alien. But that's beside the point. And they takes him to the spaceship he was found in. And the spaceship gives him the memories, much like we see before. But we see it play out differently. It's almost a shot-for-shot redo of the first issue of Man of Steel. At this point, where we see Jor-El and Laura talking to each other about sending Clark to this planet. And there's a bit I didn't talk about in the first episode where Laura sees the people of Kansas and she proclaims in Man of Steel all these savages, and what she sees is farmers without shirts and they're working on stuff, and it's a silly panel. But here it's played the same dialogue. Laura says, "Oh, the savages," and it's Native Americans. And Jor-El's given this speech of, they're not savages. They are good people. They need help. They need defense. And I believe Kal can help them because he knows, based on science and the fact they were space explorers, that Yellowstone would give them powers. So the plan was intentionally to send Kal to Kansas. And this is kind of true of Man of Steel, by the way. Man of Steel, later on, it's revealed that Jor-El did some time on Earth and got to know the farmers. It's weird, beside the point. But here, Jor-El knows the Native Americans, and he's sending Kal there to basically not be a white savior, but to help them kind of be a white savior. It's kind of the flaw of the book. So he sends him there, and it's literally a subversion of the story, and it subverts the John Byrne American Kal-El story in a way that is just clever, because instead of Superman being, and this Superman gets internally conflicted by, that's the best part of this, Roger Stern does a good job just writing this series of vignettes. It moves pretty quick, as a quick pace as it goes to the war, and you just see scenes from different moments. But there's a bit where Clark learns his true origin, and he's distraught because he realizes he was not sent here to fight for the Union. He was sent here to stop the Union, not stop for the Confederacy. Oh, no, no, no. He was here to stop the United States from taking the land of the Native Americans. But by the time he comes of age or gets to the planet, it's too late. There's no natives there in Kansas, at least where he lands. And he's like, I really should have been helping them. And he realizes the error's way, not just because his dad said he had to go help them. It becomes clear to him, it's like, I was fighting for truth and justice, and what I thought was the American way, but I was not fighting for the people who really have suffered the injustice. Because the reason he fights in the Civil War is he fights for the injustice of the enslaved Americans. His belief is that slavery is inherently a flawed and evil system and deeply destructive. And he's not going, it's a states' rights issue. No, he knows what it is. It's a slave issue. And Stern puts it clear to that point. In the beginning of the book, by the way, Stern has a list of books he's read to get ready for this comic, which is pretty impressive. And encourages like a reading list. But the bit was that but the bit goes like this: is like, hey, I was fighting for the injustice of the enslaved black people of our country, and fighting for them. And I should have been fighting for the Native Americans. And he resigns his position in the military to Lincoln. He takes off, and there's a bit, the best bit in the comic, so kind of short out to the coolest moment in the comic. There's actually a couple. The bit, he gets so mad, he flies up into a thunderstorm and gets struck by lightning, like in Shazam or something. Like he's Captain Marvel getting hit with the Shazam. But it burns away the USA shield on his chest, leaving just the blank skin, bare skin in the shield shape as he lands back down to their planet. And he's just distraught. And it's so freaking good. And it's the best part. It's so cool. And again, Edward Barreto does an amazing job doing this. There are some flaws to the comic. Before we get into the full Mar and standout, there are some flaws. As much as I enjoyed this, there are some things. It does veer at the end a little too close to the white savior tropes, because his dad has sent him there to save the Native Americans, and it's complicated. It kind of leans into genre, but at the same time, if this was Superman, I feel like this would be what he would do. He would stand up for the Native Americans if he was around during the time that they were being massively displaced and suffering a genocide at the hand of the United States government. I don't think that's a controversial statement to say, and if you think it is, I'm sorry. But the United States was committing genocide against the Native Americans. I think he would have took a stand against it, and much like he took a stand against slavery in the story. So I don't think it's out of character for Superman. It just veers a little bit probably closer to the white savior trope, and I can see why maybe some people would have issues with that, but I don't think it's a fault of the book. It's just a part of the book, and it's kind of one of those things of fiction. It's like, it's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. It's just not a great thing. It's always a white person trying to saving the Native Americans or any other minority race. But it is what it is, though. Superman would do that. Superman would save people. He stands up for what's right. He stands up for truth and justice and a better tomorrow. That's the point of the show and the whole point of Superman. He fights injustice where he finds it, no matter who it is, no matter the color of their skin or their beliefs. He stands up for them because it's the right thing to do, and that's what we see here. So that's my only issue with the comic. It's kind of paced weird too, but I think the pacing's fine. It does a lot of vignettes, like I said earlier. Vignettes, jumps around. I think it does fine. It doesn't fall into the Elseworld trap either. We don't see a Luthor, as far as I could tell. I don't think I saw a Luthor in the comic. We do see a Jimmy Olsen. That's fine. Jimmy Olsen serves with them in the military, kind of helps it out. If anything, we see more of a, here's all the U.S. military figures of the Civil War. We're going to see a lot of Grant. We're going to see a lot of Burnside. We're going to see a lot of Lincoln. But that aside. Oh, another issue that some people may have with the comic is Superman fights. When he's fighting people, he does not purposely hurt the Confederate soldiers. He doesn't kill them. And he even argues that they're still Americans. They may be wrong in their beliefs, but they're still Americans. And I know for some people that may bother them to see that. But I do think that's an important distinction of Superman is he's all about making sure, while he is about righteous justice, he's not a vigilante. He's not taking lives. He's about doing it the right way in the system. Even during war, he is all about doing it the right way and having them learn from their mistakes, possibly. If not, serving their time and having the jury of their peers take them out, not killing them. I don't know. It didn't bother me. It is kind of heavy-handed how he explains it away, but honest truth, I think that fits with Superman's character. He's righteous fury, but he's not a vigilante. So he's not going to kill him. He's not the Punisher. He's not the Batman and the speeding bullets. He's a good guy. Okay. For standout moment of the book, we're running along here. The ending for this does feel a little kitschy and borderline, again, that white savior stuff. But that subtle twist of the Man of Steel origin just works really well. I love that Clark has this real true sense of justice. I think it's really cool. And also there's a bit early in the comic when Clark learns he has superpowers, he takes a cannon shot to the chest and just keeps running over the Confederate battle lines. It basically acts as a one-man army. It just goes out like he's Brock Sampson from the Venture Brothers. We're here screaming, they hit me with a truck. You just made him mad with the cannon fire. And he's just over there waylaying these people. Not killing them. There's a difference, but he is destroying their battle lines and allowing the Union to take hold in these battlefronts in the western front of the war, allowing him to actually get transferred to the eastern front. We're getting into like geopolitics and military history. All right, time to rank this story. Ranking of Superman: A Nation Divided on the list. It is definitely not the best Superman comic of all time. It's far from it. The difference between this and Birthright is night and day. But it does have a lot of things that I like about Birthright here in Nation Divided. Personally, though, I like Nation Divided better than Man of Steel. Byrne's Man of Steel is historically important. I know. Byrne's Man of Steel is influential for a lot of people. But for the fact of, one, it's a shorter story. Nation Divided is one issue. It's a double-sized issue, but it's one issue. Two, I think, as much as Byrne's art's really good, I think Barreto does a better job. And three, I just like this characterization of Superman better. Roger Stern just writes a better Superman than Byrne. This is a Superman who is more compassionate, a Superman that cares, a Superman that is American, but not in the, I am a red-blooded United States American, U.S. a citizen of the United States of America. I vote, they claims he votes Reagan. He's not red, not a red state voter. He doesn't believe in conservative. He's not a conservative. In that sense, he believes in truth and justice. He's an American, as in, I am of this land. I will fight for the people of this land. This is if this is supposed to be the greatest country in the earth, I'm going to make sure it's the greatest country in the earth because I'm going to stand up to those in power. I'm speaking truth to power to make sure they know that there is injustice and they do fix the injustice in the world. So I think this version of Superman is much better. I think it's a much more entertaining Superman. So for me, this is now the new number 2 of the list. I think it's fantastic. I highly recommend everybody check out Nation Divided. It's no joke. It is the best Superman story I've read this episode. It's definitely the story of the night, but it's also one of the best Superman stories I've read of all time. It's legitimately really good. That's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for joining me today on this journey to Superman's alternative histories in the Elseworlds. The Never-Ending Battle releases every Friday on your podcast platform of choice. You can find the companion article for each episode over on extremelyuncanny.com with links in the show notes. And along with the companion article, you'll find comic art and other relevant material that may be relevant to the discussion in the episode. You can follow the show over at NEBSuperman at bluesky.social. You can find my comic reviews over on the Comic Beat each Wednesday for both Wednesday Comic, the Marvel Rundown, and I'm still currently working my way through the Age of Revelation. If you like the show, though, if you like the Never-Ending Battle, be sure to tell a friend and rate and review it. It does help the show a lot. You can rate and review us on your favorite podcasting platform. Next week, join me as I go talk about the world's finest. That's right, we're talking about 3 Batman-Superman team-ups. And with that, never stop fighting for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. See y'all next week.